Welcome everyone to Lessonface and to Face the Music. Tonight we have very special guest. So let me start by introducing our interviewer, the CEO and founder of Lessonface, Claire Cunningham, and our guest, the former principal horn player of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, long-standing faculty member of Juilliard School and a member of the Orfield Chamber Orchestra, Julie Landsman. And let's face the music.
Thank you so much for being here, Julie. It is such an honor to have you here at Lessonface.
Thank you.
Well, I'll just jump right into questions. We have some questions from us at Lessonface. We have some other questions from community members that we've gotten beforehand. If we have some time at the end, we will try to incorporate questions from the live audience. But we do have questions that we previously surveyed that we'll just include in the mix here from members of our community. Jumping right into your background, how did you choose to play the horn?
Well, my high school band director, Joe Greco, in Ardsley, New York, told my mother that they needed French horns in the high school band. I wanted to play the English horn, not the French horn, but English horn lessons were $7 and French horn lessons were free. So my mother spotted a bargain, and the rest is history.
Wonderful. It's a very practical way of making that decision. You have had several notable teachers. What do you remember the most about them?
The first teacher I had was Joe Greco, the one who encouraged me to play the French horn in the first place. And I remember him being very positive. I could play the horn right away, and I so appreciated his positive support. And my ability to take it far has a lot to do with the encouragement that I got from my original teacher, Joe Greco. Joe Greco then brought Howard to our high school in Ardsley. Howard was the former principal horn of the Met, and he absolutely shaped my whole career. I wanted to do just what my teacher did. And his whole approach was to teach me to teach myself. And that's what I teach my students. Our lessons are lessons in how to practice and how to make yourself better on your own time, always guiding them. And that's how Howard worked with me. Howard also guided me to my college teacher, James Chambers, who was the former principal horn of the New York Philharmonic. And Mr. Chambers taught me all about style and sound, which I still embody. And a specific instrument, the Con 8D, I'm still playing my Con, which sort of is going out of fashion, unfortunately, but it comes to me with a beautiful sound, very rich. The other teacher who was a huge influence, who Joe Greco brought to my high school, was Carmine Caruso. And those are the videos that are on YouTube that seem to be very popular, which makes me so happy. Carmine's influence of love and support changed my world. He was my Mr. Rogers. Yeah.
What about their approaches was most impactful to you?
Encouragement, kindness, and love.
Wow. Thank you. This is a question from our audience. How do you balance practicing, performing, teaching, social, family, and other parts of your life?
My main job is to take good care of myself, whether it's as a performer or as a friend or just between me and myself. So I spend much of my day caring for myself. I'm a swimmer, so at 8 a.m. this morning I was doing laps. I love to cook, so I'm very conscientious about what I cook. I love to be with my friends and be social and connect. I'm a relational person, so that's another way of taking care of myself. And I'm also a meditator, so I spend time taking care of my inner life as well. And how that impacts my performing? Profoundly. It's all about balance and being balanced, and it's not easy to be balanced when you're extremely busy and a type A personality. But I try.
That's wonderful. Okay, I'll move into your approach to teaching. How much of your teaching is individual and personalized to the student, and how much is the same regardless of the student's own natural proclivities?
I'd say everything is tailor-made toward the student. I size up my customer. Mm-hmm. I see how they learn. I experiment with different ways because certain students are more visual. Some like words and information. But the basic information is the same. I have a very specific technique that I teach, which is the Caruso method. I have a very particular sound concept that I'm interested in. I've worked with Alexander teachers on posture and breathing. I continue to educate myself. I take Alexander lessons, and I practice breathing techniques that I impart to my students. So the basics are the same, but each student has different needs.
Yeah. Have you ever had a student that you can recall that you switched tactics while you were teaching them?
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it doesn't work because one of my biggest concerns and interests with a student is connecting with them. Mm-hmm. That we have a common language, that we can communicate. And if there's problems and difficulties in connecting and communicating, I'm the wrong teacher for that person. And so be it. But I try very hard. I work very diligently to find a commonality and an ease of communication with my students.
Your successful audition to the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra was famously one of the first blind auditions. Could you tell us about it?
Sure. First of all, the book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell immortalizes my audition. Mm-hmm. The last chapter talks about the blind screen at the Metropolitan Opera, which is the best audition process ever. Thank you, Metropolitan Opera. I'm so grateful for that screen. I know they had somebody in mind for that job who wound up getting a job during that audition who did very well as also, but I won. And I won because the screen was there. Mm-hmm. Having won as the first female in the brass section, I believe the screen had an impact on that. I don't think if I was not as good a player, I would have won. I won because I was the best player, but I think the anonymity of the screen made a huge difference. And I could tell when I walked out from behind the screen as the winner, when the committee gasped, and half of them walked to the back of the room because they were so stunned to see a young lady at 30 years old with long black curly hair at that time walk out from behind the screen. It's not what they expected. They didn't for a minute think that there was a young lady back there playing. So I'm very, very delighted with the Metropolitan Opera audition process. Bravo.
Yeah, absolutely. You think that they anticipated the person that they had wanted, that they had gone in expecting to choose?
I heard different things. I heard, some people were not smart to tell me what they thought.
Oh. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really, really fascinating process, and the story in Gladwell's book is definitely worth a read.
Well, and since that time, I'm proud to say that 4 of my female students won blind auditions in the French horn section as well. So there's that screen at work. Mm-hmm. First of all, that they were my students makes me proud, but it also that it was anonymous is even more amazing.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
they're phenomenal players, and I'm close with them still to this day.
Right, yeah, yeah. Clearly with the process, you're getting the seat based on your merit.
Exactly,
Yeah.
not on what you look like, if you're a boy, a girl, black or white, what instrument you're playing, if it's a brass or a silver horn, or if your embouchure looks funny or looks great, or if they don't like your shoes. It has nothing to do with it.
Right.
It's solely based on the instinct of what they hear. And in Malcolm Gladwell's book, his premise is called thin slicing, which I use all the time when I teach. I can hear someone play for a minute, and I've got it finely thin sliced to what I need to work on with that player, if it's a student who's taking a lesson or an audition. My ears thin slice.
Really?
Oh, yes.
So you can listen for just a minute, and then you
know a
can
lot.
pinpoint
I
what
do.
you need to work on.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I understand that you emphasize the mental and emotional parts of performance. How do you help your students prepare for those aspects?
Oh, there's many parts to that. First of all, meditation and visualization was a very big part of my preparation for winning the Met audition. Also, yoga and swimming. When I swim, I do it in a very meditative way, with a lot of rhythm and a lot of breathing and a lot of focus on the movement. And to be able to have a singular focus is a very important piece of great performing. So I help my students, I guide them. It's up to them to do the work, but I make many suggestions, including some guided visualizations of how to picture themselves in performance doing well, and bringing in all the senses, the hearing, the feeling, the smells, whatever is going on in the room, to have them very finely tuned in to the senses rather than getting stuck in their mental chatter.
Wow, so I've heard of visualization techniques where you are thinking of some like favorite place that you like to go, but you focus on what is happening in the room.
I focus on
Great.
what's happening to how you want to perform your piece. For example,
Okay.
we did a Brahms piano concerto in Carnegie Hall. I think it was Brahms' first piano concerto. And it was with the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra. And I remember visualizing my mother. I think she had just passed, and I wanted to dedicate that performance and those solos to my feelings about her, to my love for her. So while I was playing the solos, I could see her face in the back of the hall. And I had pictured this all before the performance. I had done some very deep relaxation. At the end of yoga, there's something called Shavasana, the relaxation corpse pose. And I pictured my mother and playing that solo in Carnegie Hall, so that when I actually did it, I was already living in something that I had almost dreamt about. Does that make sense?
It does. That's really beautiful.
And I teach it to my students, and some of them really pick up on it, and some it's like, we're not going there.
Yeah.
So I don't force it.
Right.
But those that pick up on it, they're the extraordinary ones.
Really.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
How do you build confidence in your students?
Well, first of all, I give them a great foundation of technique. You need fantastic technique in order to play music beautifully. You can have the most musical soul in the world, but if you don't have the chops, it stays to yourself. If you want to communicate the music that you have inside of you, you need to do it with a clean, beautiful technique. And that also helps win auditions, because when you're playing an audition, refinement is a big part of it. And my students, as best as I can get them there, are very refined players. But again, they have to do the work.
Right. And once they have that technique, then they have the confidence.
It helps build the confidence.
Right.
It doesn't give it to them. I also teach them
Right.
some breathing techniques and how to be grounded in your chair with sits bones and feet on the ground. So that's where some Alexander works in to the picture. Also meditation, where they're able to just focus on the breath, which helps them quiet the mental chatter. Mental chatter is what undermines your confidence. And slowing the heartbeat down by doing deep breathing. There's so many different answers to that question, but those are just a few.
Thank you. Okay. If you could go back to when you started teaching and give yourself advice, what would it be?
Don't let anybody undermine your belief in yourself. Don't let anyone mess with you. Stick to your guns. Yeah.
That is great advice. And continuing on advice, what advice would you give private music teachers for remaining motivated in their own teaching practice?
Private music teachers, actually one of my passions. And one of the reasons I'm so happy to be here, thank you for inviting me, is to teach teachers to teach. Because I've had great teachers, really great teachers. And the main thing I can come away with from my teachers and in my own teaching is to teach with love. To really love what you do, love the person you're teaching, and impart your own passion for what you're doing and how you're doing it to your student. It's the biggest piece of information I can offer teachers. It's have compassion for the student and empathy for yourself and the student, and just bring a tremendous amount of love to the room.
How do you do it?
How do I do it? Well, I practice a certain meditation called metta meditation, which is loving kindness, and it's all about your heart. It's about keeping it open, and I did it right before I came down to your studio today. I was laying on my couch, doing some metta meditation, and really picturing special people in my lives, in my life who I love, and what that energy feels like. And I try to keep it with me as often as possible. That doesn't mean I don't get cranky and irritable. I do. And those aren't my best teaching moments, but for the most part, I stay in a very kind, generous place when I teach. I try.
Yeah, I can sense it. Certainly. Many of your students have gone on to have phenomenal careers of their own. Have you learned from them?
Well, at this point, my goal is to have my former students and current students surpass me. Be better. Go for it. And some of them have, and some of them will. It's an exciting thing to watch them grow. I stay close to several of them who happen to be on the Juilliard faculty or other faculties in conservatories around New York. And we play together, we practice together. Sometimes we teach together. Sometimes I teach their students. Sometimes they teach mine. So it's a very fluid exchange, and they will approach so much of what I've given them with their own spin. And that fascinates me. I love to hear the variations of how I've taught them. It's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I will move on to our questions on practicing. How do you practice? What inspires you to practice? And has that changed since you first started?
Wow, I'm going to go backwards.
Okay.
I left the Met in 2010. So essentially I'm retired, but I'm not. But when I was at the Met, I was in prize fighter condition every day because I had to be. I was on the hot seat, and I demanded 500% from myself on a daily basis. That said, I didn't have to practice as much. I did my basics every day, and I kept my chops in good form, but the job itself was plenty. Since leaving the Met, that's a whole other conversation. Now I inspire myself to practice by not wanting to embarrass myself. Honestly, I set up performances, So I'm accountable. I have to practice. I try to do my very, very best at all times. My integrity is high, but I'm an athlete, and aging muscles have a very different response and a very different recovery time. So it's gotten harder. And being inspired to practice, I set up things that make me inspired. Like I'm still practicing, I'm a member of Orpheus. I love Orpheus. I want to bring my best game to Carnegie Hall every time. Just today I was up at Bard College where I have an affiliation as well, and some of my former students are now teaching there. Well, on Monday night we're playing a concert, which is so exciting. I'm playing with two of my former students who are in the Met.
Oh, wow.
We're doing horn trios. We're doing a piece for two horns and strings. And I get to work with my girls. I love them. And we sound so good together. And I'm sure the audience is going to be stacked with all the horn players who are up there at Bard. There's quite a few. And it's just fun. So I practice for specific events now. And I have a routine that I do pretty much every day. And sometimes I increase it or decrease it depending on what I have to do.
What does your routine look like? Can you share?
Carmine Caruso, baby. Yeah.
Okay.
I start with pretty much the same exercises which are in my videos, the 6 notes, lips, mouthpiece, horn, harmonic series, interval studies, pedal F sharp, chromatic scale, noodles, snakes, spiders, note tasting. Those are the basics. You asked me though, how has it changed over the years? And I started kind of working backwards, and I want to go back to my, before I had a job, when I was in college. I played my horn 8 to 10 hours every day. Endless. I had the interest, the drive, the opportunities, and the chops. Just the demand. I played in so many different groups, and I practiced, and I had lessons that I had to be accountable for. And at that time, I actually had 2 teachers, because not only in college did I study with James Chambers at Juilliard, but on the side, I was taking lessons with Carmine Caruso, unbeknownst to my teacher at Juilliard.
Oh, wow.
I don't know that he would have been pleased about that, but I felt it was really important for me to have my chops doctor, and also my musical inspiration and my concept teacher, which is where Mr. Chambers fit into the picture. Stylistic concept, very important. And before that, in high school, I escaped into the practice room at 8 a.m. It was a closet in Ardsley High School. And I could be found there for hours every day. I was probably skipping classes because I wasn't that inspired to be scholastic. But I was in that closet practicing endlessly, dark and dingy, and it didn't matter. I created my own beautiful world, very inspired to become first horn of the Met, which at that time my teacher Howard was. I
Wow.
wanted to be what he was.
Wow, so you had that goal really early.
Oh yeah. Since I was 14 when Howard became my teacher, I wanted to be first horn of the Met. It took me until I was 30, but I got there.
Yeah, you
So
did.
one of the questions I know you're going to ask me is what advice I have for students. And I'm going to say, dream big. Dream big. And get great teachers. Make sure you relate to your teacher and find that you can improve. Because if it's a broken relationship or the teacher isn't helping you, find one that does. Most important is that you have a teacher who can help guide you to realizing your dreams. And listen a lot to other horn players, specifically if we're talking to French horn players, and know what you want to sound like. Work your butt off. Don't let anybody stop you.
Yeah, how would you advise students decide whether the teacher is the right for them?
How do you know?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. I guess if you're not improving. If you can't get answers to how to get from point A to point B. if you can see that your success or track record comparatively to your colleagues at school isn't moving forward. I was very, very competitive. I probably still am. It just manifests itself a little bit differently. I wanted to be the best. So I also was my own good teacher. I pushed myself hard. But in order to be a good teacher to yourself, you need the right information from your teachers. And I got lucky. I had really, really good ones. I'm trying to think if I ever had a bad one. And how I did. Oh yeah. There was a time, I'm going to not name names, but
No.
this is a very vivid truth. When my teacher at Juilliard got sick, he sent a sub. And I worked with that sub for half a year, and he was not good for me. He was not good for me. Very competitive with me. I was a kid. This guy was a professional, like on the top of the field. And I just found myself feeling very badly. So the next year when my teacher got sick again, I said, I went to the dean, don't put me with that guy. I was also kind of nervy.
Yeah.
There's a good Yiddish word, chutzpah. I had a lot of chutzpah. I just went to the dean. I said, no, I won't work with him, but I want to work with this other guy, which was a great decision because this other guy was sweet as can be. He was the third horn in the New York Philharmonic, Rainier D in tennis. What a sweetheart. And very helpful, very helpful. So yeah, I had a bad teacher.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah. And you knew because you felt like he wasn't helping you achieve your goals and he was being
And I
competitive.
think also just being the kind of person I was at that time and probably still am, I could tell I wasn't getting good guidance. And I'm very adept at taking care of myself. I developed that skill at a young age, I had to, but I didn't feel that he was helping me take care of myself. He was actually undermining my attempts. Not cool.
Right, yeah.
So not cool.
Absolutely. Absolutely not. Okay, thank you for
Long answer.
that. Yeah, no, that's very useful, I think, to our community, especially. How do you define a successful performance?
I had one recently. I came away from an Orpheus concert that we did, I think it was in Kansas City, maybe 2-3 weeks ago. And I said that was a peak performance. And peak performances, you can't order them up. You can have optimal performances, which is doing your average best, which is what most performances are. But a peak performance, it's like afterwards you go, oh my goodness, I was 100% there. There wasn't any extra distraction on my mind. I loved the music. I loved playing with my colleagues. I loved what I was doing, how things sounded, and I was totally focused. That, to me, defines a great performance. How did it come out? I'm hoping good, but I know for me, I was in the zone.
Wow.
Yeah.
How often do you feel like that happens?
Not often enough.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of intention to get there, but you can't always order it up. I can remember very specific performances. There was another one where I did a beautiful visualization about my father. Before Mahler 6th in Lucerne with the Metropolitan Opera, we were on tour, and I had been doing some loving kindness meditation, picturing my dad, who I just loved, and he adored me. And my performance was dedicated to him. Every ounce of me was just honoring him. And it was a peak performance. Was it no perfect? No. I remember I had one clam in there, and it was like, I don't care. I just was so engrossed in my message to my dad, which when you play from a loving place, the audience gets it. There was another one. We had a broadcast of Julius Caesar. The same thing. There's a vatacito. It's an aria for horn and countertenor, whereas there's a lot of back and forth between the two voices. And again, I did a lot of meditation for that. I was really scared. It was a live broadcast, and The stakes were very high. I had been out with pneumonia, so I was a little bit under the weather in general and taken about 6 weeks off.
Oh, wow.
And before that performance and during it, because there's a lot of breaks in the performance, I was on my yoga mat in a practice room doing a lot of visualization of thankfulness, of gratefulness. And who was I thanking? My parents for getting me music lessons. And really, as I was playing, picturing them and just thanking them. Thank you so much for what you've given me. So grateful. And again, a grateful heart is everything.
Absolutely.
So that was a peak performance. I wept afterwards.
Wow.
Yeah.
And was that recent?
No.
Or this was a while
But
back?
it's on my website, actually. I have julielandsman.com. I'll plug myself.
Yes.
And that particular aria is in a section called Music, and I have some excerpts from some Met performances, and that very performance is there, and I got feedback. When you play in the pit, you're fairly anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting to get the feedback through the Met press department that people were writing in like, who was that horn player? It sounded like they were doing like a jazz duo with just incredible feedback, and it was very apparent that I was connected to something pretty intensely spiritual.
About that specific performance.
That
people,
specific
like, could hear
performance, yeah.
Wow, that's...
So those were peak performances that were
Yeah.
outstanding in my career that I won't forget ever.
Yeah, I will definitely check it out. It was the one from Julius Caesar?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. Thank you for wanting to listen to
Yeah,
that.
of course. Do you believe practice should always be musical?
No. I don't, and that's controversial. The Carmine Caruso method is very physical.
Mm-hmm.
It's very reflexive, sports-like training. Again, I talked about helping my students have refinement and a great technique. Well, so much of it is muscular and reflex and coordination. And that's what I practice so much of with the Caruso method. They're not musical studies, but what does it do for my music making?
Yeah.
Cleans it up, makes
Yeah.
it possible. So I don't practice my Carusos with visualizations of loving my father or anything deeply spiritual. I listen to the sound all the time. But a lot of my focus in my routine and in my teaching is about rhythm. By keeping the timing and coordinating all of the moving parts,
Mm-hmm.
which is at least 100 muscles for one note, and then they have to move to another note. In order to have everything move in a synchronistic way, you need precision timing. Now, that's not musical practice, but do I do that when I perform? Absolutely. I'm subdividing constantly. That's the way to go.
Can you talk a little bit more about subdividing and what that means?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about tennis or golf.
Okay.
There's an upbeat and a downbeat.
Mm-hmm.
Da-da-da-da play.
Mm-hmm.
So there's timing involved in preparation for hitting the note, hitting the ball.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
that's what I do when I play as well. There's always timing as aim. Timing is the key to accuracy because you're aiming with timing. If you don't miss that note, guess what? It's a little bit of a curse on yourself.
Uh-huh.
But if you go da-da-da-da play, you have a really good chance of being right on target. You still look a little mystified.
Well, yeah, it's
you-
fascinating.
Well,
yeah.
do you run?
I do.
So when you run, are you in a rhythm?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What happens if you get out of rhythm?
Right. You stumble.
You stumble.
Sure.
Thank you. So you just answered your own question.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so now we have a couple questions from the Lessonface community. Any tips for high school seniors who are preparing for auditions?
Yeah. Play mock auditions. Play for your friends. Play for your family. Grab anybody off the street and say, sit down, I need to play for you. because getting used to playing for an audience before you have to walk into an audition, say at Juilliard, kids just get scared walking in the building, let alone into the room where the horn faculty is. And we happen to be a very nice bunch, and we're quite friendly, but if you're already freaked out before you walk in the door, it's a problem. So get used to playing for people, and maybe do some jumping jacks and get your heart rate up, and then try to play your audition so you can get used to having a lot of adrenaline and settle yourself down with deep breathing. Find a way to practice being nervous, calming down, and doing your best to play. And there's a lot of information out there. One of my helpers in my sports psychology world is Don Green, and he has written several books. I want to give him a shout out for Performance Success, which I wrote the foreword to, and I believe there's some mention of me and some of my students, because we had great success with those 4 women who won the Met audition. 3 of the 4 worked with Don Green. So there's sports psychology involved in performing your best under pressure that has nothing to do necessarily with playing an instrument. It could be about a swimming competition. But how to compete, there's a lot out there. I'm trying to think, Fight Your Fear and Win is another one Don wrote, but John Douillard, I think is his name, has written some sports psychology books. Do reading and practicing on how to do well when you're nervous.
Okay. That's great tips. And after this question follows the previous one, what advice would you give a conservatory graduate majoring in performance on getting established in their field?
First of all, be a nice person. And make sure your reputation is a good one, because and then I also got into a book around that time called Creative Visualization by Shakti Gawain. This is all old school.
Okay.
This was way back then in the 70s. And that's when I started doing the visualizations. And I started picturing myself doing successful auditions. And man, did it make a difference. Huge difference.
Yeah, that's thank you. Okay, so his second question, do you feel that artistic values are changing for musicians and for horn players?
Yes, and it makes me really sad. As I've mentioned, one of my greatest joys is in the beauty of the sound. It's something I learned from my teacher, James Chambers. He had a beautiful sound, and he insisted and showed us with gesture, because he wasn't playing his horn at the time that I studied with him. He had stopped. So I had to listen to recordings, but he would do certain things with his hands and talk about spinning the sound and sang along with everything I played. And I feel that the emphasis on the beauty of sound has really taken a left turn. And it's gotten much brighter and brasher and shallower, and it's upsetting. So I don't let my students have bad sounds. They're not, We stop and we go back and fix.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you deal with our technology in the classroom? Do you have people put away their phones when you're
Actually, they have them out to record their lessons.
Okay.
But they don't text or do emails or Facebook during lessons. No.
Right.
No, that would never fly.
Right.
I don't think they'd want to.
Right.
I'm pretty demanding teacher.
I'm sure.
I'm not mean, but I'm demanding, and I'll get, irritable if it's not happening. If they don't bring in a practiced product, my frustration level could rise over time. But I've got an amazing class at Juilliard right now. I hope they're listening. I love all of them. And then, hey, I'm going to give another shout out. We have a horn class recital at Juilliard on Sunday night at 7:30 in room 309, the big room where I used to rehearse orchestra at Juilliard. And all 6 of my students are playing solos, and then we're having some duets, some quartets, and some septets, because it actually is the first night of Hanukkah, so we have a very special Hanukkah song to play at the end. And everyone's invited. It's free. Please come.
Oh, thank you. Oh, how cool. How many students are in your class?
6.
Okay.
Right now I've got 6.
How wonderful.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
It's a great number.
Yeah.
And I build a little family, a little community where we get together a lot. We do master classes. They play for each other. I've even started master classes of having them teach each other. So teaching them to teach each other helps them teach themselves. And I critique how they teach, and they get feedback from their colleagues on how to connect better with the student. For the most part, what I have to tell most of them is to connect with the student, to know who they're working with. Always check in. Are they getting what you say? Like I could tell before, you didn't get what I meant about rhythm. Is the student understanding what you're saying? And if not, find another way to get in there. Don't just keep talking. It's not about you. It's really about how the student is absorbing the information you're giving.
Okay, so a question from Laura. What's the most important thing a high school senior should think about when selecting a college program?
Who's the teacher?
Yeah.
That's it. Does that school have a good teacher? And if you have the opportunity to take a lesson from that teacher, do it. I always like it when I have prior knowledge of the student who walks into the Juilliard audition and wants to be in my studio. As I said, it's so important for me to connect with the student. If I have them in my room even for 15 minutes before I hear them in an audition, I'll know. And it's a huge gift to themselves. Or even if we meet on Skype, which I have offered students, just to have a sense of how we communicate is important to me. I don't know that every teacher's nearly as fussy about that as I am. I'm very particular about communication.
Yeah, it's everything. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and you were speaking a bit before about compassion for students. How do you how do you really practice that? How do you bring it out in?
Well, I can usually tell when they walk in the room if they're not okay. I just know. I look at them, their body language, their posture, the way they sit down, the way they sound. If they're not okay, I'll ask. And sometimes they'll tell me. Sometimes they'll say, I can't talk about it. It's too upsetting. I'll, in some occasions, say, Juilliard has a free counseling service. I really want to encourage you to get some help. Sometimes the whole lesson will be talking with, they need some guidance. And I try to keep it always steered toward playing the horn, even though some of it might be about, one fellow came in one day and said he was trying to help a fellow student, a woman, a girl, because she was having boyfriend troubles, and he was very upset about that. And I just said, what's happening is you lose yourself in that conversation, and you need all of you to play your horn well. So I'm always trying to circle back, well, I'm your horn teacher and your mentor, so let's make sure that our conversation has to do with playing your best. What does it take to play your best? I said the word balance before, and taking care of yourself. And often, it's a learning curve. I mean, I'm still figuring it out, and I'm up there. But some of the younger ones can't quite negotiate how much they should practice, or how they should manage parents who might be too hands-on, or how to manage too much playing in school on the day of their recital. One of my girls is giving a recital on Friday night, also free of charge.
Mm.
And she's playing so much in orchestra, it's hurting her chops. I said, well, talk to the orchestra manager. Tell him I said you're headed for an injury, because lip injuries are common if you don't have the ability to say no. That's a hard one, especially for youngsters who want to please. So I try to help them negotiate some of those difficulties. I'm happy to.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Do we have any other questions from the... let's see. How about... so... I believe you spoke to this a bit before, but maybe we could revisit it. I would love to hear more about your perspective on how you work with your colleagues in your teaching practices. Like, when do you decide to send one of your students to work with one of your colleagues, or when do they decide to refer a student to you? How do you guys go about that?
Sometimes it's just practicality. If I'm going out of town,
right,
I will almost always have my students work with one of my former students. If one of them comes to me and says, I'm curious about such and such a teacher who wasn't a student of mine, I'll check it out. Let me know how it goes. That doesn't happen very often, because so many of my students are great teachers that I'm excited for them to get a different perspective on the same information. I also guest teach on occasion at some of the schools where my former students teach. And they're happy to have me come in, and most of the time I'm working on Caruso, because that's my expertise. And I really like to teach the Caruso method. So I do that as a guest teacher, and if I have students preparing for auditions, I'll send them to my other students, former students. It really depends on what the needs are, but I have no problem sharing them. No problem at all. Just as long as that's what they want, and they come back okay, and I'll check. Sometimes they'll come back and say, oh, that really confused me, because so-and-so said this, and you said that. And then we'll kind of talk it out, and we'll decide what they should do, or have them try both. Like, I have a very particular way that I like to support when I play, when I blow. And it's changed over the years. Some of my older students who are teaching are still with the way that I taught them many years ago. But I've since updated, especially since I've worked with Alexander teachers. Do you want me to be more specific?
Yes.
Well, there's sticking your belly out and there's pulling your belly button in.
Okay.
I'm a belly button in girl now, but I used to pooch it out. And that's sort of the old school. That's what a lot of singers did. And I watched at the Met for many, many years. I had a seat right underneath the stage where I could see the way they supported. And there was quite a bit of variety in how a singer supports, which is huge for any wind instrument. How you use your diaphragm and your belly and fill your lungs is a very big deal. So I'll have them experiment, but I always know the way I'd like it to be, and I'll have them do it both ways. And some like to stick their bellies out. Fine. As long as you sound good and you can make that work, I won't stand in your way. I'm also very particular about articulation. Where is the tongue placed in the mouth? And I'll drive them crazy until I get it right. I want to hear it in a very clear, crisp way. And to me, there's controversy over this from other teachers, but I know how I want it. So some of the opposing views I won't encourage, but some I'll let them experiment with.
And when did you start getting into Alexander technique? When did you start?
I started in my last 3 years of the Met,
Okay.
which would be 2007, and I just felt things in my playing weren't going so well. I didn't realize at the time that the instrument I was playing on, the metal had died. Metal dies.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was played out. So I was working so hard and not getting the results, and it was just hurting. Things just didn't feel good. So I sought out help from several teachers, including somebody who was in your studio last night.
Oh, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Keith Underwood.
Keith Underwood. He was the
You're
first
welcome.
guy I saw because his thing is all about breath and breathing.
Mm.
And so we did a bit of work, and then I moved over to the Alexander teacher at Juilliard, Laurie Schiff, who's wonderful, and all of my students get to work with her. And I've since been taking some lessons from the Alexander teacher at Curtis, Ariel Weiss. Both wonderful teachers and have helped me so much with how I hold the instrument, the ease in my body and not, getting too tight, because what we do is so physical that having a finely tuned instrument, meaning your physicality, makes a difference in the sound production.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You're an athlete.
Very much so.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm fascinated that the metal can, so you
The
no longer play on
the
this.
molecules die.
Yeah.
So really old horns, which some people are very drawn to, if they're played out, literally,
Yeah.
you don't get the support you need from the metal, and you work harder in your body.
Wow.
And how did I discover mine was played out?
Yeah.
The strap on my horn case broke in the airport on my way to New Mexico, and the horn hit the ground. And I looked at it and it looked fine. I thought, great, I got away with it. Then I went to screw the bell on because I had a screw bell, which is a lot easier for traveling. The bell wouldn't go on. Something had gone wrong. And the nearest repairman to Santa Fe, where I was at the time, was in Las Cruces, New Mexico, James Patterson. Someone drove my horn to Las Cruces for me, and he took one look at it, called me up. He said, first of all, this brace got bent, and when I took the solder off, it sprung across the room. It was so tight. Second of all, your horn is dead. The metal is shot. You don't have any time left in this instrument. At which point I went home, and I switched to another horn. I had one waiting for me. And I was like, oh, thank you, Jim. That was a huge favor that I dropped my horn. It really made a difference.
Wow. Yeah, I had no idea. And this, feel free to tell me that this is a stupid question, but you're talking about New Mexico makes me curious too, like how it varies when you're playing in different altitudes.
Oh, there's a lot to be said. High altitude stinks.
Yeah.
It's dry, there's no air,
Yeah.
and I don't feel good there.
Yeah.
It's very tough. There's the Aspen Music Festival, which is beautiful. I played with the Santa Fe Chamber Music Festival for 30 years, and it takes getting used to. I'm actually going to New Mexico in a few weeks, and only have one performance when I'm there. And I'll be there for at least a week before I have to play, which will help because it changes the amount of oxygen that your red blood cells get, and that is a huge change on the breath for playing. It's not fun. And if I were a double reed player or a clarinetist, I'd be even more miserable because their reeds dry out. Not only don't they have air, but their reeds won't vibrate.
Wow.
So it is a big challenge for me personally to change altitudes. I like sea level. And now I'm spending my summers in Santa Barbara, and I'm going to do another shameless plug for the Music Academy of the West, where I teach for 2 months every summer. And it's at the ocean, at sea level. It's a beautiful place and a beautiful thing to be at sea level.
Yeah, yeah. How do you do like different exercises to get acclimated to the higher?
Well, I do my
altitudes,
normal.
or-
I mean, I swim, and for many, many years, I brought my dog out to Santa Fe with me, and we took long walks every day. She's a little too old to travel right now.
Oh.
Yeah, she's hanging in there, but she's not travel-worthy material. So I won't be doing my dog walks this winter when I'm there.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a beautiful place. And I know Keith, too, goes out
Yeah,
to
he
New Mexico
goes to
a
Georgia.
lot.
Oh,
He
Keith?
mentions, right, the Ghost Ranch.
Ghost Ranch, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful out there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's really.
Did he talk
So
about
fascinating.
altitude in any way?
I don't think I've heard him talk about that.
I'd be curious.
Yeah, we'll ask him.
Yeah.
He has another class coming up in, I think, 2 weeks. So
Shameless
we can
plug.
bring it
This
up.
is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else that I should be asking you, or that you would like to ask me? I thank you so much, Julie.
What do I have to say? I love what I do. I have tremendous passion for playing, colleagues, teaching, interacting, playing music, being in a musical environment, being a part of an orchestra, being at the Met for 25 years. Oh, I was living my dream. I miss it, but I don't, because it's probably the hardest job in the world.
Yeah.
The hours and the labor and the stress. It was the right time for me to leave after 25 years, but wow, what a ride that was.
Wow.
Beautiful, just beautiful.
Yeah, 25 years seems like an incredible tenure of performing.
Yeah, some people stay longer.
Really?
But I
Yeah.
wanted to get out when people would still miss me. So I left in the nick of time.
Well, on that note, I think I'll wrap up here. Thank you so much again. It's so great to have you in the studio.
Thank you.
I know this is going to be so inspirational to our audience.
I hope so.
Yeah, it absolutely will be. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Claire.
you
Thanks for
again.
keeping up with me.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Absolutely. So I will say good night.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.